I'm Scott. I design, build, and repair woodworking pieces. I'm opening up the doors to my shop to help you become a better woodworker. My wife and I decided to renovate our staircase. We had golden oak handrails and spindles and really worn out carpet. We've decided to close in the stair stringers, beef up the newel posts, add some wainscoting, and paint it all out to give it a more traditional look. This renovation is going to take a few episodes, so please stay tuned. Spray finishing has been a dream of mine for years now. As a woodworker, I'm always looking for the best quality finish and the fastest way to put that on. So making this commitment to spraying was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time, but the cost is what held me back. This project has 40 spindles on it, and for me to paint those by hand would have taken a really long time. So I finally decided to make the commitment to buy an HVLP sprayer. I purchased a Fuji 3-phase mini-mite system, and what you're seeing right now is me using the sprayer for the very first time. Brand new machine and never been used before. So this is a learning experience. So that took about 30 minutes to spray. It was about an hour for me to get the paint right, just because it's the first time I've ever done this. And cleanup was about 20 minutes. If you've never sprayed a finish before, the process might surprise you. It starts like anything else though, and that's sanding the wood smooth and preparing it for the primer. I put on several coats of primer to fill those open grain areas. And then after that, I sanded the primer smooth. This is standard for any other finishing process you'd have. After I sprayed 3 coats of paint though, it took additional work, and that was sanding the paint smooth to get rid of any flaws and any grain that was appearing, and then filling in the flaws before going through and applying the final 3 coats of paint, and that gave me a good quality finish. What I found was every time that I sprayed, I learned something new. The first time I sprayed these with a primer, I moved every spindle one at a time as I sprayed it. I realized that that was taking a lot of time and a lot of space. So I secured each of the spindles from the bottom with a screw and allowed me to stand them up. This way I could get 360 degrees around the spindle without actually having to touch the finish or move it. The process worked quite well. It allowed me to get through putting on a coat of paint in about 15 minutes for 40 spindles. The process of painting these 3 coats of paint took me about an hour and a half to get through, but significantly less than me having to do this by hand. Lori did most of the sanding for this project, and she's now joking that she never wants to see sandpaper again. I don't blame her because it was a lot of work involved. The 3 different sessions of sanding took a fair bit of time, but I want to show you what that looked like in terms of how the finish came out after those first 3 coats of paint. Here you can see the sheen of the semi-gloss paint, but you can see some grain pattern. So it took some time to sand that out, and the paint we used was very sandable, so it was allowing us to get down through the top layer of paint and smoothing things out so they were level. But it did take time. This will give you an idea of how long it took to do that. This first run here, I've sanded it and it's getting smoother, but it's not quite smooth yet. So it takes a fair bit of elbow grease to get through that grain pattern that was coming through. I'm not sure why it happened. We sanded these before and primed them and sanded again. It may be the sheen of the paint that's showing more detail than what we were able to see with a flat primer. But here's what it looks like after it's been properly sanded. Today's an exciting day for me. I get to use my HVLP sprayer for the first time indoors. This is a brand new tool for me, and so far I've been using it out in the driveway to paint the spindles. In an open environment like that, I could experiment with how much flow was coming out and how much bounce back I was getting. Now that I'm indoors, it's a little bit different. So I've got a little more control over how I'm using the tool, and I've tarped everything off to make sure I'm not spraying the walls. So right now I'm all ready to mix up the paint, but before I do that, I need to take my respirator and change the filters. I use a dust filter in the workshop, which is pink code, and this is for using with paints. So it's important to make sure you've got the right respirator for the job to protect your lungs. This was obviously the first coat that went on, and playing it back while I'm editing it, I can't believe how inexperienced I look. But the reality is this was only about the 7th or 8th coat of paint I had ever sprayed. Well, the spraying was fun. I did make some mistakes. But the key thing I did was I inspected the dry finish to understand where the problem areas were and to fix them. I'm going to share a few examples here of what I did, so if you decide to take on a project like this, you can avoid the same mistake. Now what you've been watching me do here is start off by painting the newel post on the far right. Then I came across the flat area between the newel posts and layered on a coat of paint. That coat of paint is wet, and the problem right now is I've got overspray that's heading towards that wet area. And overspray is paint that's atomized, gets into the air, and it goes through a long process of dropping, and what I'm doing right here is dropping little granules of paint on top of my fresh coat of paint. That left me with a surface that was very rough and needed to be sanded. So to prevent this, I ended up figuring out the right order of operations. Paint the newel posts first, and then paint the flat area in between them. Another mistake I made was getting too much paint in the corners on that first coat. I realized I shouldn't paint into the corner, but rather paint the flat surfaces on either side of the corner to avoid getting too much paint. The key thing I learned from my finishing experience was looking at the dried coat, looking at where the problems are, and then tweaking the process to make sure you do better the next time. This ended up taking me 4 coats, and by the time I got that 4th coat on there, I was very happy with the end result. I'm really happy with how the paint finishes turned out on this project. Painting the spindles with a paint sprayer definitely saved a lot of time. However, painting the stairs with a paint sprayer took a lot of time because of the masking involved. It took about a half day to prep the space. But the finish is much better than I could have gotten if I were to brush it by hand. I've secured all these oak railings to a base so that each of them can be finished on all sides. That way it just saves me an extra step. They've all been sanded, and the fillet strips have been sanded as well, and all ready for the stain. I'm going to start off by putting a wood conditioner on first, and that'll just reduce any blotchiness that might come through. And then I've got a stain here I'm going to use. This is English chestnut. Give it a nice warm tone. So preconditioner goes on for 5 to 15 minutes, and then the wood stain goes on for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then wipe it all off, and it should have a nice even tone. For the protective finish on the railing and the fillet strips, I'm using a Minwax product, which is water-based, but it's oil modified, meaning it's got the properties of traditional oil polyurethane, which is that warm yellowing color that you get. So this is a little bit different than using oil-based in that, first of all, it doesn't have the smell, which is fantastic, but the other part is it raises the grain a fair bit, and it needs sanding between every coat. So the process for doing that is using 220 grit sandpaper and sanding everything down. And then what I've done is I've shop vac them with a brush. So I've gotten off as much dust as I can, and I put a coat on, and afterwards it still seemed a little rough. So this time I've sanded it, and I've used what's called a Tack Cloth. So what it is a very sticky cloth, and it's like cheesecloth that's impregnated with some urethane that's partially dry. It's very, very sticky. And I always wear a glove when I use it because it gets my fingers so sticky. This is the color of the cloth when it's unused, and when I flip it over, I wipe down all these pieces after they had been vacuumed. So that shows you the amount of dust that comes off. I've got 6 sections of railing here and the fillet strips. So it captures a fair bit. So I'm ready to put my last coat on, and that should get me ready for installing the railing soon. The railing system is now ready to be installed, and our last and final video, you'll get to see these railings go in. We've got the brown oak railings you've seen me prepare, and we've got a special guest coming in to help install these. Something I've never done before, so I hired some help to come and show me how it's done. So I hope you'll stick with us. You get to see what our final project looks like, and we're really looking forward to the results.